Ladies and gentlemen, in the red corner, hailing from the state of Nevada, representing the Steam and Wise Guys, it's the always feared Vegas Odds Maker. And in the blue corner, the crowd favorite from South Florida, Marc Winning Picks Lawrence. And now, let's get it on! Against the spread, Winning Picks with Marc Lawrence.
Ho, 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 and welcome back once again, everybody. This is Marc Lawrence along with Victor King on this Christmas week of football action as we get set to go against the spread with the college football bowl games now moving in full gear, along with the final week of the NFL season right around the corner. And with that, I'm going to welcome our co-host Victor King from King Creole Sports, who I know is feeling awfully good these days, not only about Christmas and the upcoming New Year's holiday, but also coming off a fantastic week where he swept the board in the NFL totals tip sheet and, most importantly, cashed that big 10-star NFL totals play of the year winner, a total crush play on the Seattle Seahawks and the Kansas City Chiefs. Kudos to you, Victor, and I hope your Christmas holiday was as good as your results have been.
Thank you. Right back at you, Mark. Feeling good. Looking sharp, a happy camper these days. We got a good feel for the NBA over-unders, 67% thus far in the College Bowl over-unders. And as you mentioned, a really nice pre-Christmas weekend to sweep the board, totals tip sheet 3-0. And, of course, we want to thank everybody who did join us. A play we had been researching for about 5 weeks. We ended up using the Chiefs-Seahawks over as our 10-star game of the year. Brought home the bacon. It was the game in which there were more offensive yards than any other game on the NFL scoreboard, even more offensive yards than that Saints-Steelers game. I believe the Chiefs and Seahawks accounted for somewhere around 880 total offensive yards. A little chippy in the beginning. There was only 24 points at the half, but you knew at some point the Chiefs would turn it on and make a game of it. I believe there was 32 points scored in the final 16 minutes of that game. So we got that happy ending. Very, very pleased with that result. And we were pleased that we finished up your run of 10-star winners with a 10-star winner of our own. And, of course, I'm talking about your Carolina Panthers 10-star NFL Game of the Year and your Ohio State Buckeyes 10-star College Game of the Year.
Yeah, it's been a nice season. We're going to kind of have a tear in the eye as we bid adieu to the 2018 football season here. But we're excited with the college football bowl games coming to a conclusion here as we draw nearer to New Year's Day. Then the following week, obviously, the college football championship game, which will be, by the way, our final podcast for the 2018 football season. We'll be back with a special NFL playoff preview podcast here on Marc Lawrence Against the Spread next week. So mark that down as we get ready for the upcoming NFL football playoffs. And as we talked about, the college football bowl games are now in full swing here. I'm going to ask Victor here for a little update about how the favorites and dogs have fared. But one thing that I do know, Victor, is we'll be moving from what we call the minor bowl games onto the major bowl game portion of the schedule, where primarily the group of 5 teams are dominating the itinerary now, but it'll be the move to the Power 5 conferences, the big boys, coming up right around the corner. Victor, what have you seen so far as the favorite dogs breakdown over-under totals have gone in the college bowl games this season?
We're going to bounce the numbers off of Andy to determine what's been going on in terms of the sports books. I would imagine the general public is doing pretty well in the bowls right now. I say that because of the emphasis on the favorites and the overs that have been hitting. We've got the numbers. Favorites in the bowls have gone 11-3 straight up, 10-3-1 ATS. A really, really strong start for the Chalk. 7-1 ATS in the first 8 bowl games. Only 3-3 since. And in terms of the over-unders, the last time we talked to everybody was last Wednesday. And I believe the first 6 bowl games in terms of over-unders ended up going 3-3. But since then, since our last show, the Gasparilla Bowl on Thursday went over the total. Both of Friday's bowl games went over the total, Bahamas Bowl and the Potato Bowl. And then on Saturday, there was a quartet of college bowl games. 3 out of 4 of them went over. That would be the Birmingham Bowl, the Armed Forces Bowl. That was the bowl game we talked about last week on the show. And if you played Mark's selection on Army, you were a really happy guy throughout that game. We had a slight opinion on the over. That one was pretty much a no-brainer as well. The Dollar General Bowl went over. The only Saturday bowl game that went under was Hawaii. So right now, after 14 bowls, in terms of the over-unders, 9 overs, 5 unders. Again, we're accentuated by the chalk and the overs thus far. But you were telling me a really interesting stat, Mark, in regards to yards per point or yards per play in the bowls thus far. And I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's from our good friends over at vsin.com in Vegas, the Vegas Stats and Information Network. They put out an excellent daily, not only product, but also publication, that weekly newsletter and daily update information. And they were updating in my report on Wednesday morning as we do this show about the fantastic success that college football teams have had when they own the superior yards per play number over their opponent. You have a better yards per play on the season than does your opponent. Thus far in bowl games, now this is in bowl games coming into Wednesday, so through Christmas Day, teams with the superior yards per point record are 13-1 straight up and 13-0-1 against the spread so far in college bowl games. So for those of you who maybe perhaps might want to shy away from the statistical analysis portion of handicapping games, you're doing yourself a huge disservice by doing just that, because it's edges like this that we talk about that really come into play when it comes to making you a better handicapper. And you can find out exactly who these teams have better yards per play numbers are for the rest of the bowl games inside the College Football Bowl Stat Report, the Playbook College Bowl Stat Report. It's available online at playbook.com. You want to put your hands on a copy of this because there's plenty of bowl games that they'll be kicking off between now and the New Year's Day bowl games. And to find out who those superior teams with yards per play numbers have to be, check it out online at playbook.com, the College Football Bowl Stat Report. You're tuned in to Mark Lawrence Against the Spread, the nation's most popular sports handicapping talk show. And with that, let's switch it over to the National Football League side of things, where we're into our final week of the 2018 football season. And with that, we've got the playoffs look like they're pretty well locked up. We've only got one team, one battle in the NFC, where there's one team, the Philadelphia Eagles, on the outside looking in. The Minnesota Vikings, who we'll be talking about in our NFL Game of the Week, looking to protect that sixth and final spot. On the AFC side of things, we've got a battle in place here. 4 teams, Baltimore, Indianapolis, Tennessee, and Pittsburgh, have yet to solidify their position in the playoffs. So there's a lot to like about the football card this particular weekend. We overviewed all the games in our Playbook football newsletter that's available online at playbook.com. This Wednesday, as will the totals tip sheet be available this Wednesday online. 1 day delay this week with the newsletters because of the Christmas Day holidays. And with that, Victor, I'm going to ask you about what happened, what you saw in the National Football League last week. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it looked like some more low-scoring football games.
True, and a good week for the Dogs, too. 9-5-2 ATS for underdogs last week. On the season, we got the Dogs turning a nice profit overall in pro football at 121, 101, and 11 ATS. And yes, indeed, another low-scoring week in the NFL. Of course, we had 3 unders in the totals tip sheet. They went 3-0. That'll tell you a little bit about what happened last week. Out of the 16 games, 6 overs, 9 unders, 1 tie. The month of December, extremely low scoring. We know how high scoring the first half of the season was, but the numbers have really come down to earth here in the month of December. Now we got, in the last 4 weeks of the NFL, 25, 37, and 1 over-under. That's 6, 9, and 1 over-under last week, 7 and 9 each of the 2 previous weekends, and then 5, 10, and 1 over-under to open up the month of December. Yes, another low-scoring week in the NFL. As you mentioned, a lot of things are pretty much set in stone in the NFL. The one team that I want to talk about for a minute, if we can, Mark, again, is the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, I was at a Christmas Eve party, and one of the people at the party was a Philadelphia Eagles fan, originally from Philadelphia. And they're kind of perplexed there in Philadelphia these days with the fact that it's been Nick Foles who has led Philadelphia to this late recent surge for the defending Super Bowl champions. And they don't know what to do there, the fans. Do we keep both quarterbacks? Do we trade one away? Nick Foles has got something that Carson Wentz doesn't have. He may not have the physical attributes. He may not have the statistics, but he's got something in regards to being a leader that really the team rallies around on the field. I want to go back to that Cowboy game from 3 weeks ago. That was a bad beat for both of us there. And, the Philadelphia head coach has made a name for himself being that gutsy guy, going forward on fourth down. And they had the perfect opportunity to go for a 2-point conversion at the end of the game against the Dallas Cowboys to sneak away from Dallas with a win, and yet they opted to play for the overtime. The game ended up going over the total in overtime. Dallas ended up winning that game with a touchdown in overtime. If Philadelphia does what they have done and what got them to the Super Bowl last year and rolls the dice on the division road, they could be the one that's in the playoffs right now with Minnesota looking up at them.
Well, that's good points, Victor, and I agree with you. I don't know what happened with Doug Peterson and that play calling in that particular football game. It cost you and I dearly in that game. And in fact, I was talking with you before the show. We're in pretty nice. I think we're in 46th place in the Westgate Superbook contest, and we had obviously Philadelphia in that game. We win that game. We're in 18th place in the contest. That just shows you how critical and crucial one game in the contest can mean. And a result like that will kind of won't go away for a while, believe me. But getting to your point about the two quarterbacks, and I think it's an interesting situation going on there. And I know there's a lot of talk in the city of brotherly love these days about keeping Nick Foles and maybe trading Carson Wentz, getting a number 1 draft pick and a key player, yada, 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 and all those good things. But you can rest assured they're not going to keep both quarterbacks. They can't afford to keep both quarterbacks. Right. Nick Foles is going to hit the free agent market next year, and he'll be a starting quarterback with some team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, maybe perhaps even the Washington Redskins if Alex Smith isn't able to come back. But he'll end up finding a starting spot somewhere.
Maybe the Dolphins too. Maybe
the Miami Dolphins down here. Exactly right. But the bottom line to me is, what do you do if the wildest scenario is if Philadelphia somehow qualifies for the playoffs this year, goes on and wins back-to-back Super Bowls? How do you let Nick Foles go? Right. After back-to-back years? But the truth of the matter is Carson Wentz is indeed a franchise quarterback, and when he's healthy, he's as good as anybody in the league. He was having an MVP football season last year when he went down with a terrible knee injury, and so the bottom line, I don't think there's much of a decision for Philadelphia to make there. It's just a question of what they can get in the marketplace for Nick Foles, if anything, right now before he hits the free agent market. But nonetheless, we'll keep an eye on what happens with Philadelphia, the Eagles, and the other teams in the National Football League. Just before we go to break here real quick, I'll review with you guys out there the current odds from our friend Jay Westgate at the Westgate Superbook in Las Vegas on teams to win the Super Bowl. Right now, New Orleans Saints are the number 1 team at 8-5 odds. They're followed by Kansas City at 4-1 odds. Then the Rams at 5-1, New England at 6-1. Then it drops off to Chicago at 12-1. Baltimore comes in at 20-1. Houston 25-1. And we've got 4 teams: Dallas, Indianapolis, Minnesota, and Seattle, all at 30-1. And I guess if you're playing 30-1 long shots, you might want to take a bird in the hand with Seattle and Dallas, who are in the playoffs, because if you played Indianapolis and Minnesota, you might have a losing ticket before the playoffs even get here. But nonetheless, NFL Super Bowl odds to ponder between now and the start of the playoffs next week. Don't go away, guys. When we come back, Victor and I, we're going to tear apart our college football bowl game of the week. We've got a beauty in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl when Florida takes on Michigan. That and a whole lot more to come here on Mark Lawrence Against the Spread.
If your goal is to become a winner at sports wagering, then the all-new Sports Data University is just for you. You can learn responsible sports wagering in live classes and free courses from the world's sharpest sports wagering instructors, such as Marc Lawrence, Victor King, Andy Iskoe, and an array of other top experts. Join live classes and ask questions you want answers to. Listen, learn, and watch at Sports Data University. Visit today at sportsdata.com. That's Sports Data University, located at sportsdata.com.
All right, guys, let's get to it. Our college football bowl game of the week. And we've got a beauty on tap in the Peach Bowl this year where the Chick-fil-A does a great job in pairing up really good football teams. They're not quite a premier bowl game, but they're one cut below. And they filled the bill that way this year when the Michigan Wolverines will take on the Florida Gators in Atlanta, Georgia. Victor, your take on the Gators and the Wolverines in this year's Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl matchup.
Right, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Atlanta, Georgia, indoors on the turf, 12 o'clock Eastern. Michigan around a touchdown favorite, over-underline 50.5. It looks like it's gone up perhaps a half point up to 51 as we record the podcast here on Wednesday morning. It seems to me that all the pressure on this bowl game has got to be definitely on the Michigan team and Jim Harbaugh, especially how they finished the season with that ugly loss against Ohio State. And if you ask me, Florida's the team that's playing loosey-goosey or playing with house money. A fantastic season for Mullen in his first year with Florida. So it seems to me that the team that has the noose around their neck in regards to this game is indeed the Wolverines. You know, for two teams with very good defenses, in fact, one of the teams has a number one ranked defense in the country. It's a little bit surprising to see that they have both had more overs than unders this season. Florida 7-4-1 over under. Their average game has gone over the total by plus 2.3 points. The low over under line was 44 against LSU this year, a game that went over the total. Their high over under line was 60 in that non-conference game against Colorado State, a game that went under the total. Of note is the fact that they finished the season, Florida, going 5-1-1 in their last 7 games. And, in fact, a perfect 3-0 to the over in their last 3 games, in which they really busted out on offense with 528 yards, 603 yards, and 536 yards on offense to finish the season. Surprising high-scoring numbers for Florida. On the Michigan side of things, the Wolverines went 7-5 over-under on the season. Their average game actually went over by almost a full touchdown at plus 5.8 points per game. The low over-under line was 38.5 in their in-state rivalry game against Michigan State, a game that did stay under the total. Their highest over-under line was, again, in a non-conference game against SMU, 54.5, in which the game did go over the total. Like their counterparts, Michigan finished the season on a high-scoring run, 5-2 over-under last 7, 3-1 over-under in their last 4 games. And while I do realize they got the number one defense in the land, allowing only, 262 to 3 yards per game, they did finish the year giving up 395 yards against Purdue, and then, of course, 567 in that game against Ohio State to close the regular season. I'm leaning over here in the Peach Bowl a little bit, Mark. You know, we talked about the fact earlier in the season that it's kind of surprising that these two teams are playing each other in a bowl game again. They just did so in the 2016 Citrus Bowl. But let me go back in the actual calendar order. The last 4 meetings between these two have gone a perfect 4-0. They kicked off the 2017 season by going over the total against each other. And then, as we just mentioned, they went over the total in the Citrus Bowl in 2016. So each of their last 4 meetings also over in the 2008 Capital One Bowl and over the total in the 2003 Outback Bowl. We also know from researching our Peach Bowl tendencies that, first off, last year's game was pretty high scoring. Central Florida beat Auburn 34-27 at this site, indoors at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And also the Peach Bowl in the last 7 years has averaged 59.2 points per game. With everything said, we're going to lean ever so slightly on the over. The line is going up ever so slowly. It's 51 the last time we looked. Based on the point spread and the over-under line, the anticipated final score is Michigan around 29, Florida around 22. I think the game will be a little closer to that even. But, yes, we do have an opinion on the Peach Bowl going over the total, Mark.
Victor likes the over total in the Florida-Michigan Peach Bowl matchup between the Gators and the Wolverines. New head coach Dan Mullen for the Florida Gators has put new focus into this football program here. They're suddenly relevant once again, and that's important for a big Power 5 football conference, a football factory, if you will, at Florida. They played some pretty good football this season here, and you take a look at Dan Mullen, and the thing that he's done well in his career, even dating back to Mississippi State, is he's taken down opponents that come in off losses in their previous game. He's 31-5 straight up and 22-11 to the spread against teams that come in off a loss of 7 or more points. The Florida Gators themselves have fared well in bowl games of late here. The last 11 bowl games Florida's been in, they've gone 8-3 straight up and to the number. We like the Southeast Conference in bowl games, especially when they're taking off against Big Ten opponents. We like it because they're 7-2 straight up and 8-1 to the spread in the last 9 SEC Big Ten Bowl matchups. Michigan, as Victor mentions, comes in here off of that crushing loss to Ohio State and probably about as flat as a football team might be expected. They fell themselves out of, obviously, a spot in the college football playoffs, and they fall instead down here to the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl instead. The number one defense in the country for the Michigan Wolverines. They've held 6 opponents to season-low yardage marks this year. The Florida offense is going to have to find a way to put some yards and points up on the scoreboard against this Michigan defense because it is ferocious, although Ohio State was able to exploit them in that season-ending loss that I just talked about. Michigan comes into this football game bowl favorites of more than 5 points, just 3-6-1 to the spread the last times they've been favored by more than 5 points in a bowl game. Good news here when the Big Ten does take on the Southeast Conference, and the Southeast Conference is off a win. They're 6-1 to the number. But the bottom line to me here, guys, is this, is if you take a look at the psyche of the Michigan Wolverines coming into this game, absolutely crushed in that blowout loss to Ohio State, couple that with the fact that Michigan in bowl games after losing to Ohio State to end their season, they're just 1-4 straight up the last 5 bowl games they've been in doing just that. They have a hard time getting back up off the mat. I'm going to play Florida plus the points in what I think will be a crowd favoring venue here in in Atlanta, Georgia, favoring the Florida Gators. You'll see a lot of blue and orange in the stands in this particular football game. I'll play the points with Florida over Michigan in the Peach Bowl, Chick-fil-A South Bowl game for my side in this contest. Don't go away, guys. When we come back, Victor and I, we're going to tear apart our NFL game of the week. We're going to go inside the black and blue division and take a look at the Bears and the Vikings. And we'll also hop out to Las Vegas to get the Vegas vibe from our good friend Andy Isco when we're back with more here on Mark Lawrence Against the Spread.
All new Playbucks tokens are here. Only at Playbook.com can you earn rewards and get up to $100 in free Playbucks tokens to use as you choose. And with your Playbucks tokens, you can use them for Playbook Experts picks and selections. Plus, you earn 20% in free bonus tokens when you do. If you haven't got your $100 in free Playbucks tokens, do so now. Simply visit Playbook.com and click on the tokens link. It's that easy. That's the all-new Playbucks tokens waiting for you at Playbook.com.
The only football newsletter in America devoted exclusively to NFL over-under totals. The Totals Tip Sheet is a must-read if you're serious about adding extra income to your bankroll this football season. Get exclusive insight on the overs and unders from Victor King, the NFL Totals Guru, at Playbook.com. The Totals Tip Sheet has got you totally covered this football season. It's the best reference source of its kind in the nation. Get your Totals Tip Sheet today at Playbook.com. SportsWagering.com and enjoy the winners.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Mark Lawrence along with Victor King, and we're going against the spread on this, the final week of the 2018 NFL football season. And with that, let's take a look at an NFC North Division battle when the Minnesota Vikings take on the upstart Chicago Bears, with a lot of playoff implications involved in this football game. Victor, how do you see the Bears and the Vikings faring this Sunday?
You got that right. You know, we touched on the situation there in the NFC conference at the beginning of the show. Minnesota wins and they're in, that's for sure. Minnesota lost to Chicago in a Philadelphia win, and the Eagles would be in the playoffs. And, of course, Chicago already has secured a playoff spot. They can still get as high as the number 2 seed if they win the game and the Rams lose at home to the San Francisco 49ers. Statistically, odds-wise, that's probably not going to happen. So they're, pretty much locked into playing during the opening wild card weekend. In terms of the spread and the OU line, I'm showing that the Vikings are somewhere up to about a 5.5 point favorite. The over-under line is already crossing over some pretty significant numbers. Opened at 41.5. I made a small play on the under at 41.5, anticipating a line move downward, and it has gone down. The last time I looked, it's down to 40.5. There's even some 40s out there. So it has already crossed over that key number of 41 points. And if you're a totals player, you know that many, many games in the NFL indeed finish right on 41 points, and you should let that kind of be your guide as to which way you're going in this game. Case in point, in the most recently played Monday night game, we had a 3-star selection on under 42 points in the Denver-Oakland game. It finished right at 41. The game ended right at the 4-yard line. Oakland could have rubbed it in, but they did not. And we ended up with a nerve-wracking, nail-biting 1-point win, but nevertheless, 41, probably the number 1 most popular key over-under number in the NFL. In terms of the series, 3-7 over-under last 10. That's 3 overs, 7 unders. The average combined points in those games between the Vikings and the Bears, 39.0. The last 7 meetings in Minnesota have averaged 38.0, 2 overs, 5 unders. On the season, Chicago, surprisingly, even with that very good defense, still more overs than unders on the year at 8-7 overall. However, we do want to point out that they started off the season as one of the top over teams in the league. They went 7-3 over-under in their first 10 games. But since then, the Bears tightening up on defense, play a little more conservative on offense, have gone 1-4 over-under in their last 5 games. And in fact, each of their last 3 games have gone under the total, and by big margins too, by 18.8 points per game. The last 3 Bears games have indeed gone under the total. It's not surprising to see Minnesota as one of the better under teams in the NFL. They were last season as well with that very, very good defense. A defense that looked like they were slipping in the first half of the season, but has come on strong here in the second half. Minnesota has gone 6-9 over-under on the year. Of course, their splits, that is a little revealing as well. They've gone 4-3 over-under on the road. But at home, the Vikings have gone under in 5 of their 7 home games this year with an average of only 42.7 points per game. Like their counterparts, they started off the year with more overs and unders. Their first 9 games went 5-4, but Minnesota has closed the season 2-5 over-under in their last 7. Their last 5 games, there's been only 1 over. There's been 4 unders. The average Viking game has gone under the total by 6.7 points per game. And from our team trends department, the Bears now 1-8 over-under last 9 games in December. They're 2-8 to the under after scoring less than 15 points. That's the case as they're off that 14-9 win against the Niners last week. Also, 1-4 to the under when playing against a division opponent who has revenge against them. Minnesota, always a good under team, against division opponents. 7-21 over-under for the Vikings last 28 division games. Also 3-8 over-under last 11 home games. And finally, when we put those two together, we got the fact that in the last 2 years, Minnesota divisional home games have gone a perfect 0-5 over-under. You know which way we're leaning in this particular game. At a line of 41 or more, I would make this a normal, regular, 3-star King Creole play. The fact that it's moving downward a little bit is going to take a little steam off it there. There's still a little beat on the bone. Again, at 41 or more, we call it a normal play on the under. At 40 or less, we call it an opinion on the under, Mark. I would also consider a teaser on the underdog and the under Chicago plus 11 and under 46.5 in a potential 2-point teaser. But let the over-under line that you get the game at dictate what you want to play in this game. Again, 41 or more, it's a normal play on the under. Anything less than that, we'll call it an opinion.
Teaser to the dog and the under in the football game as well. So value it up, guys. Look for the best proposition side you can find as far as that total goes, and teasing it along with the dog in the football game. And I agree with Victor about the dog in the football game as well. The Chicago Bears come in here as the biggest surprise team in the National Football League this season here. And in fact, I got to make Mike Nagy my NFL Coach of the Year for the job that he's done with the Bears this football season here. To me, this football team mirrors the Jacksonville Jaguars of last year. Ferocious defense, winning football games on the road, knocking off good quality football teams, not being intimidated by anybody. That's been the case for the Chicago Bears this football season here. The maturation of quarterback Mitchell Trubisky is happening right now. Maybe not as startling, perhaps, as what they were expecting, but he's improving with each and every start. In fact, I put him ahead of where Blake Bortles was last year at this particular point for the Bears. In his career, Trubisky, 6-2-1 to the spread as a dog of a touchdown or less. And in fact, in division games this year with Trubisky, they're a perfect 4-0 to the spread are the Chicago Bears, who come into this football game on a major winning streak. 8-1 straight up and to the spread their last 9 football games, with the only loss being an overtime setback. Minnesota comes in here, win, and they're in the playoffs here. Just that simple for the Minnesota Vikings. They know what they have to do, win the game, make the playoffs. But I oftentimes find teams in that particular role playing with pressure having to do just that. Good news for Minnesota. They're 8-1 to the spread as last home games when they're coming off a straight-up and point spread win. The bad news is the quarterback, Kirk Cousins, when I put him under the microscope, and we did this inside this week's Playbook Football newsletter here, we found some numbers that aren't all that warming to Minnesota Vikings fans, if you will. Kirk Cousins in his career against winning opponents, he's only 9-19-1 straight up. And in fact, against those same teams from game 10 on out, when that goes down the stretch and accounts, he's just 1-8 in 9 games against winning opponents here. And in fact, with the Vikings against winning opponents, he's only 1-5-1 straight up. So he tends to chew up on the guys that are beatable, but really struggles against better football teams. The Vikings come in here looking to avenge a 25-20 loss they suffered in the middle of November here to the Chicago Bears. That was, by the way, the Bears' first win against a winning team this football season. But they've really solidified themselves since, and they went on to beat the L.A. Rams, and are playing, like I say, winning 8 of the last 9 football games into this contest here. The interesting thing to me about the Bears is they will be alive in this football game, coming to play with a reason. The reason being that if the Rams were to lose to San Francisco, they could flip spots and land the number 2 spot in the playoffs with a bye week. That's a lot of incentive for the Chicago Bears coming into this contest here. But regardless, I like the way they're playing. I like their head coach, and I like everything, all the vibes about the Chicago Bears. This year's Jacksonville Jaguars, I'll play Chicago plus the points against Minnesota for my side in this football game. You're tuned in to Mark Lawrence Against the Spread, the nation's most popular sports handicapping talk show. And it's time to hop out to Las Vegas and check in with our good friend Andy Iskoe from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas. Andy, I hope Santa was good to you this past weekend and the football games as well.
the only thing he didn't deliver was any football games on Christmas Day. We
Yeah.
did get to enjoy the NBA and that quintuple header and the Hawaii the Diamond Head Classic in college basketball, but there was something missing. I missed the old blue-gray game from Christmas Day that we used to have years ago, one of those early college all-star games. But otherwise, it's been a very good wind-up to the season, wind-up to 2018 for that matter. And, of course, I'd like to wish everyone, all of our listeners and all of the Playbook family, the happiest and healthiest and profitable New Year's in 2019.
It was Christmas Eve. We're gathering around, starting to open up some presents, and it was sure nice to be able to put on an NFL Monday Night Football game and have that on in the background. And nothing like that to be found on Christmas Day, as you mentioned here, just NBA basketball. So we got to maybe get the football gods back in order next year when it gets to be Christmas time. Maybe a different day of the week might help the situation. I don't know, but I guess it shows that we are football junkies to the purest when it comes to football games, especially around the holidays. And it's holiday time now, Andy. I know your Logical Approach football newsletter is winding down as well as the football season goes. Let our listeners know what they could maybe perhaps see in this week's football newsletter if they visit your site at thelogicalapproach.com, if you would.
Well, the newsletter will be available through the Gamblers Book Club this week, probably later on today. Actually, it'll be a double issue because I've wrapped up the bowl content for our subscribers. They got the email edition of the newsletter earlier this week as far as the bowls for Friday and Saturday, and within a few hours after ending our recording of this podcast, the Week 17 and the Monday and Tuesday, the December 31st and January 1st bowls will be available, but through the GBC, it'll be a combined double issue that'll get underway with the game starting on Friday. Not much in the way of commentary or features this week other than to give everyone the customary cautions about handicapping Week 17 in the NFL. A lot of teams have clinched spots and will be resting players, especially those that know or have a pretty good idea that they will be playing in the wild card game just the following week. Of course, there are many teams that have been out of contention, and some may rest regulars because they've already had a long season. No need to risk any additional injury, but also those teams get an opportunity to give some of their younger players on the roster who didn't get to see a lot of action this year an opportunity to show what they can do as far as beginning the planning for next season. And then, of course, there are teams whose fates will be decided in Week 17, and a number of teams will end up going with their regulars until such point that either the game is comfortably in hand and it looks like they're going to win, or unfortunately things turn negative and it looks like they're not going to be able to mount much of a comeback, at which point mid-game they may pull some players. And as a matter of fact, for my best bet this week, I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. It'll be in the NFL, but it'll be a first half wager rather than a play on an entire game, because it does involve a team whose fate may be determined while they're still on the field of play. So that basically is the feature this week. And, of course, as I mentioned before, the issue that will be coming out to subscribers within the next couple of hours, we'll take a look at the games Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday as the college bowl season wraps up on Tuesday, with the exception of the national championship game the following Monday. And, of course, the NFL regular season wraps up, meaning that there are just 11 games remaining, starting with the 4 wildcard games the week after New Year's.
Yeah, it's nicely packaged, the college football bowl games this year, in the sense, like you mentioned, Eddie, that the bowl games will wrap up on New Year's Day and then follow up with the college football championship game the following Monday. So it's really kind of a nice coordinated package, if you will, for the football bowl games. And I know also this is crunch time in the Westgate Superbook contest, the final week, if you will, for all the money. And it looks like things are bunching up there, Andy. If you would, a little bit of a review of what's going on in the Westgate. The Classic, the Golden are also over at the Golden Nugget with our good friend Tony Miller in his contest as well.
Sure. And by the way, just getting back to the end of the bowl season, it's kind of sad. I kind of missed that old International Bowl on January 5th, but that's gone. That's gone by the wayside over the last several years, and they wrap up nice and neatly on New Year's Day, as they really should, with just that one grand finale a week later, 6 days later on January 7th. As far as the Super Contests are concerned, the Super Contest Gold, we have one leader with a record of 51, 26, and 3. That's a total of 52 52.5 out of a possible 80 points. That's 65.6%. For the season. That's the winner-take-all contest. That person has a one-game lead or a one-point lead over one contestant. Another contestant is a half-point further back. Overall, there are 23 contestants within 5 points of the lead. And, of course, this is the winner-take-all contest, so those with 47.5 points or more still have a chance. Of course, for that group of those with the 47.5 points, they would need to go 5-0 and need the leader to go 0-5 and correspondingly 0-4-1 below that, etc. So it's unlikely, but as they say, there's still a chance for those. But it looks as though the winner of the Super Contest Gold is going to have a better record this year than they did last year, which was the first year. And, of course, more people in the field this year. It looks as though that record will be somewhere around 65%, and perhaps even a 4-1 or a 5-0 could raise that percentage to 66.7. As far as the consensus last week, that was 3-2 in the Super Contest Gold, with the most popular selection being the Seattle Seahawks on on Sunday night. That was a winner, along with the Houston Texans winning by the hook, getting 2.5 against the Philadelphia Eagles, losing the game but covering by that half point. And on Saturday, the Baltimore Ravens, the second most popular choice, was also a consensus winner. The two consensus losers for the Super Contest Gold were the Carolina Panthers, who were 3.5-point underdogs in that contest after they shut down Cam Newton. And the Atlanta Falcons went on to win that contest. And the New Orleans Saints laying 6 to the Pittsburgh Steelers, also one of the top 5 selections. In the regular Super Contest, I'll just briefly go through the consensus last week, which was 2-2-1. The winners were on the Minnesota Vikings and the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks, the most popular pick in both contests this past weekend. The two losers, the Philadelphia Eagles, laying the 2.5, so the regular contest consensus went against one of the consensus plays in the Super Contest Gold, as it did with the other consensus loser in the regular contest. The regular contest had the Chargers on Saturday as a losing selection, whereas in the Super Contest Gold, the Ravens were a winning selection. So interesting that we had two opposition plays in the consensus for each of those contests. The one push in the main contest, the Chicago Bears laying 4 to the San Francisco 49ers. As far as the leaderboard is concerned, this is, of course, the final week in both of these contests, and the leader has jumped up to a nice lead of a point ahead of the second place contestants, 57-23. That's 71.3%. As far as the leader goes, the second place contestant at 56. Then there's a bit of a gap, 1.5 to 3 contestants tied for third. But if you finish in the top 5, you're going to get a very nice payday. The winner is going to get something around $1.5 million. Then it drops down, but still 6 figures for several contestants finishing after that. Overall, there are 19 contestants within 5 points of the lead. Right now, that would mean 52 points out of a possible 80 would get you in the top within 5 of the lead. That's 65%. A total of 81 contestants are right now in position to collect full shares for the paying places. That's 62.5%. There are 29 contestants tied for 82nd through 100th place, which is the final paying position. That's 61.9%. So basically, if you're hitting 62% or better this year, you stand to cash something in the contest. And I don't imagine those numbers will change all that significantly over Week 17, because there are a lot of people right on the heels of that 62% who, if they have good weeks and some of those guys ahead of them slip, you can move up 70 or 80 positions, not as far as paying places, but the number of contestants that you will be able to pass with just one win or one extra point. So it figures to be an exciting race down to the finish. In the Golden Nugget contest, this is the contest where you pick 7 games per week, college or pros, sides only, no totals this year. This pays 20 places, and currently the leader is at 75, 35, and 2. That's 76 out of a possible 112 points. That's 67.9%, and that's worth noting because for much of the season, the leader in the Golden Nugget contest was hitting in excess of 72 and 75%. It's come down somewhat over the last few weeks, and perhaps it's understandable because really over the past 3 to 4 weeks, you've basically had mostly NFL games to choose from with very small offerings in the college bowl games, which have been spread out. And, of course, we've seen the NFL have some very unusual results, as it normally does over the final 3 to 4 weeks of the regular season. So the contestants still putting up an outstanding record. 67% is outstanding, especially when you're talking about 112 plays. And right now, 69 points is what would be involved in the final paying positions. It pays the top 20, with 11 through 20 getting your money back, and 1 through 10 making a nice little payday by having a very successful season in the Golden Nugget contest.
Nice recap of what's going on the final week of the big contest in Las Vegas from the Westgate and also the Golden Nugget contest, the Ultimate Challenge contest at the Golden Nugget, from Andy Iskoe visiting us from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas. And Andy, I noticed as when we do our line moves segment on the show here, we've been also hitting on the advanced lines. And correct me if I'm wrong, but for the first time in a long time, I saw advanced lines coming out of the Westgate for the final week of the season. Usually, with it being division games and all the uncertainties, that there weren't lines, but we did see some lines last week. Was that the first time that they've done that since they've gone to this all-division format for the final week of the season?
You know, I'm not positive. I think it is. I know that they've only been putting out, has the Westgate, these advanced lines for 3 or 4 years, as I recall. I don't recall it going much further than that. And for many years, of course, they would withhold a number of Week 17 games just right after Week 16 ended. In fact, right now, as we are speaking, there are 3 games for Week 17 for which there are no lines up, and that's the Carolina-New Orleans game, the Indianapolis-Tennessee Sunday night game, the winner of which will go to the playoffs, likely as a wild card, but potentially as the AFC South champion, and the loser goes home, and the Arizona-Seattle game, and I'm guessing that may be due to the fact that Seattle could be resting some players. They've already clinched a playoff spot, but they won't know whether or not they'll be the number 1 or number 2 wild card. That will depend upon what happens in the games between Chicago, Minnesota, and Philadelphia and Washington, which will be played simultaneously. Those will all be part of the later set of games on Sunday. So I guess the books are waiting for a little bit more certainty about what's going to take place in Seattle, as well as the Marcus Mariota injury with Tennessee. I would expect Tennessee to come out a very slight favorite in that one. In fact, given how well Indianapolis has played, I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee is something like a 2.5-point favorite, and they let the public decide, do they want to lay less than a field goal with the home team, or do they want to take maybe less than a field goal with the team that arguably is playing as well as any team in the NFL right now, the Indianapolis Colts, and, of course, Carolina, New Orleans. Don't think New Orleans has announced its plans for Drew Brees quite yet, and wouldn't be surprised if we see Hill instead of lining up at wide receiver, lining up at quarterback for a good part of that game. So the book's taking a bit of a cautious approach. Now, as far as the games that are available or were available for Week 17, and I think we touched upon it last week, if you had some strong opinions about what might happen in Week 16, there were some nice bargains out there, for example, in Week 17. And starting with the first game on the board, the Dallas Cowboys at the New York Giants. The Giants had already been eliminated by the time Week 16 got underway. The Dallas Cowboys needed just to win their game this past weekend to clinch the NFC East, unable to move up or down from that number 4 seed. And, of course, they did get that win over the weekend. Last week, the Giants were 2.5-point home favorites, expecting that Dallas would win, but not really being certain of that. However, when this line came up again Sunday night, Monday morning, the Giants were 7-point home favorites, bet down to 6, meaning that if you anticipated the line move that would jump the Giants up, but not knowing how much, and you thought Dallas was going to win last week, you could have laid under a field goal for this week's game against the Dallas Cowboys with the New York Giants. Last week, the Philadelphia Eagles were 5.5-point road favorites for this week's game against the Washington Redskins, knowing that the Eagles had a win last week, and that was dicey for quite a time. Now that they've won, they still need help, but Washington, which has been eliminated, the Eagles opened 7.5-point road favorites. It's been bet down to 6.5, but still higher than what you might have been able to lay with Philadelphia last week. Looking at a couple of the other games, the Baltimore Ravens, 4.5-point home favorites last week when they, prior to playing at the Chargers, they're hosting the suddenly red-hot and enthusiastic Cleveland Browns this week. And Cleveland playing extremely well. In fact, Cleveland playing for an opportunity for its first winning season since 2007. That's pretty remarkable for them to be in that position after going 1-31 the past 2 years, including 0-16 last season. However, the odds makers, knowing that Baltimore now controls its own fate and all they need is a win over Cleveland, so that 4.5-point line was adjusted up to the Baltimore Ravens 6-point home favorites right now as they face the Cleveland Browns on a Sunday. An interesting line move involves a game between two teams out of contention. That's the Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last week, Atlanta was a 3-point road favorite in this contest. As mentioned, they went on the road and they won at Carolina this past week. When this line came up once again, Tampa Bay played a competitive game in their loss to Dallas, but of course Dallas had everything to play for in that game. Atlanta came up as a 2.5-point road favorite on Sunday night, and yet steady money has come in on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so that as of midweek, Tampa Bay now the 1-point home favorite. By the way, that Indianapolis-Tennessee game that I mentioned, there's no line on currently. Last week, the look-ahead line, the line that you could have bet last week, Indianapolis was indeed a 2.5-point road favorite at Tennessee. So even though I thought Tennessee might be the small home favorite in this game when a line finally comes up, let's see if the lines makers go with what they liked last week before both Indianapolis and Tennessee won this past weekend. The Pittsburgh Steelers, 13-point home favorites last week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals out of contention. When this line came up on a Sunday evening, Pittsburgh now playing with the need to win, but also needing help from Baltimore, actually needing help from Cleveland. That's another irony. How is it amazing that that Pittsburgh Steelers fans will be rooting for the Cleveland Browns this weekend?
Yes, they will.
And not only that, they'll be rooting for the Cleveland Browns to beat the former Cleveland Browns franchise, which of course is now the Baltimore Ravens. So a little bit of oddity there, but nonetheless, when this line came up, knowing the great need for Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh opened a 15.5-point home favorite. It's been bet down slightly to 14.5. We did see Cincinnati at least show a little bit of measure of not quitting by putting up that backdoor covering touchdown against Cleveland last week that hurt a lot of bettors and had a big impact in the Super Contest where they were 8.5-point favorites and the Browns were a popular choice laying that big number. Looking at one other game of interest, the Chargers at the Broncos. Of course, depending upon what happens in the simultaneously played game between the Chiefs and the Raiders, the Chargers could end up with the number 1 seed, whereas there's been no change in the Kansas City-Oakland line from last week, 13.5 Kansas City. There has been a change in the line from last week with the Chargers. They were 5.5-point road favorites for this matchup against Broncos. Broncos have lost 3 in a row after sitting at 6-6 and perhaps being a wild card team. Chargers now have to lay 6.5 in that game at Denver. Rams and 49ers. Rams were 9-point favorites last week against the 49ers. They're now 10-point favorites. You mentioned earlier about Chicago being in a position to get the number 2 seed should the Bears beat the Vikings on the road and should the Rams end up losing. Wouldn't expect them to lose this year to San Francisco. Of course, last year they had already wrapped everything up and they were beaten badly by the 49ers. Of course, Jimmy Garoppolo was at the helm and ending the 49ers to that lengthy end-of-season winning streak that gave a lot of hope for the future. Unfortunately, Garoppolo injured early this season. By the way, and you may have pointed this out in that Chicago-Minnesota game, that this could easily be a preview of a rematch the following week between the Bears and the Vikings. In fact, likely, because you, again, have to expect that the Rams are going to beat the 49ers. I'm wondering, and again, this is part of the intangible handicap, would the Bears prefer to face the Minnesota Vikings or would they prefer to face Philadelphia or Seattle? Because if they beat the Vikings, they will not be facing the Vikings if Philadelphia wins. So just an interesting thing on the side. Another part of what makes Week 17 the most challenging week of the season, even more challenging than Week 1.
Great point about the possibilities existing in that Bears-Vikings game. I wasn't aware of that, Andy, but it does put a different spin on the football game as well. We'll see exactly how the Chicago Bears approach that game with Minnesota. It'll be, interestingly, one game we'll have to absolutely watch on the football card this week. I know Victor's got a question he wants to run by you on the show this week as well. With that, Victor, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Sure thing, Andy. You know, one of the number 1 rules that you get from a very smart handicapper is to stay away from the popular teams. A bad bettor bets on teams, but a good bettor bets on numbers and they bet on value in the point spread. It's no more evident than the NFL, particularly in the month of December. Take the four most popular teams in the NFL right now, two from each conference: the Kansas City Chiefs, the New England Patriots, the LA Rams, the New Orleans Saints. Right now, if you bet the Chiefs, you're 0-4 ATS in your last four games. If you bet on the Patriots, you're 0-3 ATS in your last three games. New Orleans, despite being 10-5 ATS on the season, they have failed to get the cash in 3 out of the 4 games in December thus far. LA Rams, man, they've gone 2-6 ATS in their last 8 games. I think you would agree that you stay away from teams. A good bettor always bets numbers and where they can find perceived value in the point spread.
Victor, there's a lot of agreement with you on that. I normally don't like to play those high-priced favorites, which they will be. And you mentioned Kansas City 0-4 its last 4 games. Remember, the Chiefs started the season, I think, 7-0, I believe it was, ATS. So there's a team that you are continually paying a higher price for. And keep in mind that few teams are able to sustain the level of play that we see early in the season to late in the season, and vice versa. Some teams that start slowly end up gaining steam around mid-season. So it's only natural that the lines are going to follow the performances of the team. So over the second half of the season, I often try to isolate those teams that looked bad in September but have started to play a little bit better through October, and especially when this is a team that has had some recent playoff experience. For example, teams that may have had 2 to 3 appearances in the last 3 to 5 seasons at least, and some even more than that. So it's important to follow the numbers as follows as far as well. Let me phrase it this way. Value is always something that varies from bettor to bettor, from handicapper to handicapper, based upon what they perceive the line should be and what the line is. However, chasing the better number, looking for the better number, and playing the numbers is something that is somewhat unrelated to value, because 2.5 is a very key number. You want to avoid taking plus 2.5 where you can, and you prefer laying 2.5 where you can when you're liking the favorite and you're laying less than a field goal. So from that perspective, numbers are extremely important. But and the point that you're making there is that the public plays teams and the professionals play numbers. And that's exactly what it's been for, probably about the last 8 to 10 years, as the handicapping and bookmaking industry has gotten much more sophisticated. There's been a greater wealth of knowledge out there through the internet, through basically just the passage of time. Those of us who have been doing it for 30, 40 years, whatever it may be, when we were starting, there wasn't that much information out there because you didn't have the means of communicating that information on a mass basis as you have over the last, well, say 20 years since the internet came into existence. I've maintained that over the last 10 to 15 years, the sharpest square is more knowledgeable than, say, the sharpest wise guy of 30 years ago.
Good points, guys. Excellent handicapping points, and it's all sage advice to move forward with when you're handicapping football games. One point Andy hits on that I think is going to be a little bit perplexing for not only the contestants in the contests this weekend. Having to lay these exorbitant amount of double-digit points this week is kind of not in a lot of sharp handicappers' DNA, but the situations being what they are, and having to moving about yourself a position to advance or stay alive in this contest is going to make it very, very interesting to see what happens. You're going to see a lot of underdogs players that are going to be laying some chalk this week, positioning themselves in those contests as well. So all in all, this is really quite of a chess match week, if you will, as far as the contest and the handicapping goes this football season here. And Andy, before I let you go, I know you mentioned that on your complimentary play on the show this week, you're going to get yourself involved in a first half wager. And I'd be interested to hear exactly what that is and what it is you're looking at.
Yeah, let me just point out or reinforce the thought about Week 17. There are always uncertainties involving every game and every week, but in Week 17, those uncertainties are enhanced because you're doing a lot of guessing work as far as what the motivation will be for certain teams and certain players. Will they play hard? Will they play hard for a full 60 minutes? And that sort of leads into my selection for this week, and it involves the game between Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, about a 14.5 to 15-point favorite for the game. They are 8-point favorites in the first half. Now, they will be taking the field and playing at the same time that Baltimore will be hosting and playing the Cleveland Browns. If Baltimore wins, Pittsburgh is out of the chase for the playoffs. They cannot make it as a wild card. Their only way is through winning the division, and that would occur if Pittsburgh wins and Baltimore loses. On the other hand, we don't know exactly how this game will play out as far as the Pittsburgh-Cincinnati game, because if suddenly Pittsburgh finds that Baltimore is winning, say 24-3 at the half, they may not come out and give their best effort in the second half, as opposed to if indeed this was a game that, let's say the Ravens are up, say 17-13 at halftime, or maybe Cleveland's ahead, then we probably get a pretty spirited effort from Pittsburgh for the balance of the game. I expect Pittsburgh to come out extremely aggressive. They are an 8-point favorite in the first half. Now, they may end up going on and winning this game by 35 points if indeed Baltimore is in a competitive game and Pittsburgh still feels they have a chance to win and Cincinnati decides, okay, our season's over. On the other hand, at the start of the game, everybody is equal. Pittsburgh, and then they felt that they were victimized by some officiating calls in the game against New Orleans, although I don't know that it would have made that much of a difference, and New Orleans was probably going to win that game anyway. But nonetheless, Pittsburgh, I think, realizes that they cannot afford to give Cincinnati any chance, especially early in that game. Pittsburgh, by what they would like to do, at least in theory, they'd like to be up like 24-3 at halftime and then take their chances with Baltimore in the second half. But if Baltimore comes back and all of a sudden it appears that Pittsburgh is not going to be able to make the playoffs regardless of whether or not they win, maybe they slack off a little bit with realization sets in that they're not going to make the playoffs. I don't think that situation exists in the first half, so I'm going to look for a big effort out of the Pittsburgh Steelers to open their game against Cincinnati.
Andy Iskoe lays the points with Pittsburgh in the first half in this Cincinnati football game for his complimentary play on the show this week. Andy, I'm going to wish you the very best of luck this week. As always, great job on the show, and we'll look forward to visiting with you next week for our final show here on Mark Lawrence Against the Spread next week.
Thank you, Mark. And that does bring up one point, whereas there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of teams we don't know how they're going to play this week. Next week, we know we should be expecting each team's best efforts. Once the playoff begins, every game is count, every play is critical, and we should get the best efforts, and those generally make things for a better handicap when we can look at the basis of established form. I'd like to wish you, Victor, and all of our listeners once again a very happy and healthy New Year, and I look forward to speaking with you in the middle of Wild Card Week.
That was Andy Iskoe joining us from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas. Don't go away, guys. When Victor and I come back, we'll put the final wraps on the show. I'll share with you my awesome angle of the week and our complimentary plays when we're back with more here next on Mark Lawrence Against the Spread.
Attention sports fans, it's time to get in on all the football action at mybookie.ag. This industry-leading website is renowned for having the best odds and more betting options than any other sportsbook online. This is why Mark Lawrence only endorses mybookie.ag. Call toll-free at 1-844-900-2387 or go online to mybookie.ag to open an account and start winning today. Get the odds you want and the fast payouts you need, guaranteed. That's mybookie.a as in apple and G as in games. Tell them Mark Lawrence sent you. Only the biggest, only the best, only at mybookie.ag. Sign up today.
And now, the moment you've been waiting for. From the hot South Florida sun, it's Mark Lawrence with his awesome angle of the week.
All right, guys, let's get to it. Our awesome angle of the week in the College Football Bowl's upcoming games. We call our awesome angle No Way, Not Again. And what we're looking to do is to play against any bowl favorite who won its bowl game last year straight up as a dog of 6.5 or more points. If they're off a straight up and point spread loss, and they allow 22 or more points per game. Teams last year who pulled a surprise as dogs of 6.5 or more coming into a bowl game this year favored coming off a disappointing straight up and ATS loss with a wobbly defense allowing more than 22 points a game. By playing against these teams, we're 19-3 against the spread since 1980. Our No Way Not Again play against this week will be against South Carolina. Saturday in the Belk Bowl, we'll play on Virginia against South Carolina for our awesome angle play on the football card this week. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Victor King from King Creole Sports off that red-hot winning week last week. Victor, if you would, let our listeners know what you've got on tap this week at King Creole Sports and about the totals tip sheet.
Sure thing. One more issue left for the totals tip sheet for the season, and that'll be available at the playbook.com website by Wednesday evening. Andy briefly touched on the fact that this is a difficult period for handicapping, let alone betting. I'm talking about the final regular season week of the NFL season. I mean, you think it's tough handicapping week 1 in the NFL with so much uncertainty? In many cases, week 17 is even more difficult. So I think Mark would probably agree with me in that in terms of NFL plays this week, let's not go hog wild. You don't have to have a lot of volume this week. Sure, there's going to be a handful of games, 3, 4, 5, that are worthy of a wager. But I think here over the month of December, we've done a decent job building up the bankroll for this last half of the college football bowl season, building up the bankroll for the NFL postseason in which the games do count, and you know you're going to get the best effort from each team like Andy just talked about. So let's put up the caution light, the yellow caution light in regards to a lot of volume this week in the NFL. I mean, you mentioned big point spreads, Mark. More than half the games have point spreads of 9 or more this week in the NFL. So again, that said, a little bit of caution in regards to pro football this particular week. One play that we're going to be on is we're going to be going under the total with Old Reliable. And with Old Reliable, I say that kind of with a question mark. Old Reliable is the New England Patriots. You know, when you take a look at the over-under standings this year in the NFL, two things really jump out at you. They make your jaw drop almost. And it really should be the other way around. And when I take a look at the top 2 over teams this year in the NFL, it's not surprising to see the Kansas City Chiefs are one of them. But do you know who is tied with the Chiefs for most overs this week in this season in pro football? New York Jets. That's right, 10-5 over-under, tied with the Kansas City Chiefs. I talked about it last week. Very, very surprising, given their personnel, given the tough division, that the fact that the Jets have gone over in 67% of their games this season. On the other end of the spectrum, and again, in many, many years, this would be the other way around. But the number 2 under team this year is the New England Patriots. Remember those good old days? You can count on the Patriots to score a lot of points, maybe allow their fair share of points. Not this year. The value has been on Patriots unders, and in fact, 7 of their last 8 games have indeed gone under the total. We were on the under last week against Buffalo. It went under the total. Their average margin minus 8.5 points per game. They are now the number 2 under team in the league, in the NFL. And let's not forget, this is already historically a low-scoring series, Jets and Patriots. Each of the last 5 meetings have gone under the total between these two teams. Average over-under line 46.4. Average combined points less than 40, 39.2. We used this last week in New England's game against Buffalo. When you see a really big team at home in a division game and they are favored by double digits, you always want to think under first. Division home favorites of an 11 or more points have gone 3-15 over-under in the last 5 seasons. A strong under percentage that applies to the New York Jets game this particular week. I also touched on the fact that the Patriots have not covered the point spread in each of their last 3 games. In the NFL, teams who are 600 or better on the season, who are favored and are off 3 or more ATS losses in a row, have gone 9-25-2 since 2007. They've gone 1-8 over/under in each of the last 4 seasons. That applies to the Patriots in this particular game. And what clinches it for me is a Game 16 specific pattern. And it's Game 16 teams in the NFL who are closing the season with back-to-back home games, like the Patriots are, have gone 15-33 all-time. That's easily 68% under the total. Again, all-time in our database when the over-under line is greater than 42 points. It is in this game. It's at 45.5. Get your play in as soon as possible. It's also gone 1-9 over-under. In the last 4 seasons, we're going under the total again in the Patriots as they host the Jets this particular week. Game flow, game script indicates, again, like last week, they get out to a big lead. They sit on the ball in the second half. The game finishes under the total. As far as our Big King Creole play, nothing big this weekend. We will let you know, though, that our college bowl game of the year is going to be an over, and it's going to be in one of the New Year's Day games on Tuesday, January 1st. It'll be up at the playbook.com website a little bit later this week. That's going to be our college bowl game over of the year, available this weekend. Again, best of luck. Happy New Year to all Patriots and the Jets under the total.
A rock-solid handicap to the Vegas, New England, New York Jets football game under the total from Victor King at King Creole Sports. And also be sure to get down on his college bowl over total play of the year. The New Year's Day game on January 1st. You can get that online at playbook.com anytime after this Friday. Get on board for that college bowl over total play from Victor King at King Creole Sports. Before I get to my top complimentary play on the card this week, I want to remind our listeners out there once again that the Playbook tokens are being very, very well received at the site this year. People love the tokens because you don't have to labor yourself with entering bank cards for every time you make purchases. You can just go on the fly with tokens. You can use tokens to get guaranteed makeups from any handicapper you choose for a non-winning selection here. A lot of fun, and get 100 free tokens if you haven't done so yet when you register now online at playbook.com. Click on the Get Tokens link, if you will, to get your 100 free tokens. I will also be releasing my 10-star college bowl play of the year, available online at playbook.com this Friday. It's part of another $99 football weekend of winners. You want to get on board by calling my office toll-free. The number is 1-800-321-7777, or visit us online at playbook.com for both my 10-star bowl game of the year and Victor's college bowl totals play of the year at playbook.com. My complimentary play on the football card this week, we're going to go out to the Music City Bowl this Friday when Purdue takes on Auburn in a matchup of one team that's thrilled to be in the bowl game, that being the Purdue Boilermakers, against the other team that's flat and despondent to be in this bowl game. That's the Auburn Tigers. Looking at this contest here, Purdue comes in here with the number 8 ranked red zone offense this football season here. They've done a great job this football season after getting out that slow 0-3 start. They've worked their way into a bowl game, and tip of the hat to them and head coach Jeff Brom, who, by the way, Jeff Brom has never lost a bowl game. He's 4-0 straight up and 3-1 to the spread. You're taking a look at Auburn, who comes in here deeply disappointed, expected to challenge Alabama in the SEC West. Instead, they settle for the Music City Bowl. Inside the bowl stat report, we note that Auburn went up against 6 other bowl teams this year. They were just 2-4 straight up, and against the spread in those games, they won the yards only one time, and they were outstatted 123 yards a game against other bowl teams this football season here. You put all this stuff together here with the fact that Auburn's lost the money 3 times in a row against Big Ten teams. And we talked earlier on the show about the huge yards per play disparity and how well it's doing in college football bowl games this year. Purdue has a monumental disparity in this game. They average 6.5 yards per play. Auburn only 5.5 yards per play. That's a full yard advantage to Purdue in this football game. I'll play Purdue plus the points over Auburn in the Music City Bowl for my complimentary play on the show this week. And that's going to put the final wraps on this edition of Mark Lawrence Against the Spread. Until we're back next week with our final show for the 2018 football season, I want to thank our co-host Victor King from King Creole Sports, our good friend Andy Iskoe joining us from Las Vegas from TheLogicalApproach.com, and we know our good friend Jack Reynolds is listening always from above. Going to wish you a very happy New Year's in the days coming ahead. And until then, remember to always to bet with your head, not over it, and good luck as always.